What's up, my friends, and welcome back to the Influence Exchange. Thank you for pressing play, thank you for watching on YouTube, and thank you for listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere this podcast shows up. If you are a new listener, thank you for being here again. And if this is your first time listening or watching, welcome to the show. I'm really glad you found your way here. I'm your host, JV, and this podcast is a space where we talk honestly about real life. The things we think about but don't always say it out loud, without hype, no yelling, and no pretending we have it all figured out. Just real conversations about growth, self awareness, and learning how to stop getting in our own way. And that brings us to today's episode. Today, we are talking about something almost everyone does, but most people don't even realize they're doing it, which is we say no to ourselves before life gets the chance to say no. We don't say it out loud, not dramatically, but quietly to ourselves. And it shows up as thoughts like, I'm not ready yet. That's probably not me. I don't want to embrace myself. I do it when I feel more confident. What if I fail? And those thoughts sound reasonable. They even sound mature, but over time, they do something dangerous. They stop movement. Before you even try, you opt out. Before you even ask, you assume the answer. Before you start, you convince yourself it's not the right time. And then you notice weeks turn into months and months turn into years. And nothing changes, not because you weren't capable, but because you never gave yourself permission to try. That's why today's episode is called Stop Saying No to Yourself Before Life Does. This episode is not about forcing confidence. It's not about pretending fear doesn't exist. And it's not about pushing yourself nonstop. It's about becoming aware of the way you quietly shut doors and learning how to pause before doing it again. In this episode, we're going to talk about the understated ways people disqualify themselves early, why waiting to feel ready keeps you stuck, the phrases that quietly shut down opportunity, and how to stop saying no to yourself without pressure or perfection. So if you ever caught yourself thinking, I could do that, but probably not me, or I try later, or I don't think I'm the kind of person who does that, you're in the right place. Take a breath, set everything else down for a moment. Now let's get into it. All right, my friends, let's start here because this is where everything begins. Most people don't wake up and say, I'm going to hold myself back today. That's not how it happens. Saying no to yourself is usually quiet, understated, and internal. It doesn't sound harsh, it sounds reasonable, which it sounds like I'll wait until I'm more confident. I'm not really qualified for that. Someone else could do this better. Now, probably not the right time. What if I mess it up? And here's the problem, those thoughts don't feel like self sabotage, they feel like logic, so you trust them. Now, let's talk about how you take yourself out of the running before anyone else does. Let me be clear. A lot of opportunities don't pass you by. You step aside quietly, you don't apply, you don't speak up, you don't ask, you don't start, you don't even try. Not because someone told you no, but because you already assumed the answer. And most of the time, No one even knew you were interested to begin with. How about this? The most common lie we tell ourselves: I'm not ready. Almost everyone falls into this. We tell ourselves, I do it when I'm ready, but here's the truth most people realize too late. Readiness doesn't come before action, it comes from it. Confidence doesn't arrive first. Clarity doesn't arrive first. Comfort doesn't arrive first. Those things show up after you start, not before. Waiting to feel ready is one of the easiest ways to stay exactly where you are. How about this? Fear doesn't say stop, it says wait. Fear is understated. It rarely shouts, don't do this. Instead, it whispers, just give it more time, maybe next month. Let's think about it a bit longer. You don't want to rush this, and before you know it, years pass, not because you choose comfort, but because you kept delaying courage. Now let's talk about how self-doubt often digests itself as self-awareness, because this matters. Self-awareness sounds like I know my strengths and I know where I'm still growing. Self-doubt also sounds like I'm probably not good enough, but the two gets confused all the time. So instead of saying I'm still learning, but I can try, you say I should probably stay quiet until I'm better. And that's how people with real potential stay invisible, not because they lack ability, but because they underestimate it. The cost of saying no to yourself. Let's talk about the real price you pay. It's not about the opportunities you miss or the things you never try. It's the relationship you built with yourself. Every time you shut yourself down, before you even begin, your mind learns. Don't trust your ideas. Don't trust your instincts. Don't trust yourself. Over time, that turns into a habit. You stop believing your own encouragement. You stop taking your goals seriously. And you stop expecting more from yourself. Let me pause for a second and speak directly to you. If you've ever been holding back, playing small, waiting for permission, you're not lazy, you're not broken, and you're not behind. You've simply been listening to a voice that sounds protective but is actually limiting you. And the purpose of this episode isn't to shame that voice, it's to recognize it so it no longer gets to make your decisions. Because once you notice how often you say no to yourself, you finally create space to choose a different response. And that's where we're heading to next. All right, my friends. Now let's talk about the voice behind the no. Because saying no to yourself doesn't just happen out of nowhere. There's usually a voice running quietly in the background. And for most people, that voice sounds familiar because it sounds like you. The voice in your head, the voice sounds reasonable, not harsh. Here's what makes it so deceptive. It doesn't say things like, you're terrible, you're fail, or you don't belong. If it did, you'd shut it down immediately. Instead, it sounds calm, logical, protective. It says things like, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We should be realistic. We don't want to look foolish. What if this doesn't work out? But just because a thought sounds reasonable doesn't mean it's true. That protective voice is trying to keep you safe, not help you grow. Here's the reframe. The inner voice isn't malicious, it's protective. Its job is to avoid embarrassment, rejection, discomfort, and risk. The issue is that growth requires all four. So when you let your voice focus slowly on safety, take the lead, you end up sidestepping growth, even when the opportunity is good for you. How about confusing hesitation with intention? This one catches a lot of people. You feel nervous and tell yourself, this must be my gut telling me no. But there's a difference between intention and fear. Intention feels calm and grounded. Fear feels heavy and urgent. Fear says, don't move, stay where it's safe, let someone else go first. Intention says, this matters, even if it's uncomfortable. If a thought is shrinking you, it's probably fear, not wisdom. So let's talk about how past experiences quietly shape your no. A lot of self-doubt doesn't come from the present. It comes from the past. Maybe you tried before and it didn't work. Maybe someone dismissed you. Maybe someone failed publicly. Maybe you were told that's not for you. Without realizing it, your mind starts saying, let's not do that again. But here's what most people miss. Past failures isn't a prediction, it's data. It shows you where you learned and grow, not where you're supposed to stop. Let's talk about this. The voice that gets louder when something actually matters. Notice the pattern? The inner voice shows up strongest when the opportunity is meaningful, the risk feels real, and the growth will change you. You don't hear it much over small decisions. It rises when the stakes are high because that's when staying the same feels safest. So when you've been doubting yourself around something important, it doesn't mean you're incapable. It usually means you're standing right on the edge of growth. Here's a simple question to ground yourself. Ask this in real life. Is this thought helping me grow or helping me hide? If it's helping you hide, pause. If it's helping you grow, lean in. Even if it's slow, you don't have to silence your voice. You just don't have to let it steer. Bringing this back to you, let me be clear. You're not weak for experiencing self-doubt. You're human, but you don't have to agree with every thought that crosses your mind. Once you recognize that voice saying no is often just fear dressed up as logic, you start to reclaim your power because the moment you start automatically believing that voice, you create space for a different response. And that's exactly where we're headed to next. How to begin saying yes to yourself in small, practical ways that don't feel overwhelming. So stay with me. All right, my friends, this is where I want to slow this down and get real with you. Because everything we've talked about so far isn't coming from a book. It's coming from experience. I've been the person who talked myself out of things before anyone else had the chance to say no. How I used to say no to myself without realizing it. For a long time, my no didn't sound dramatic. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like I do it when I'm more ready. I just need to sort a few things out first. Let me wait until I feel more confident. Now isn't the right time. Or on the surface, that all sounds reasonable. But looking back, I see what was really happening. I wasn't waiting for readiness. I was waiting for certainty. And certainty almost never arrives before growth. So I stayed stuck, not because I lacked ability, but because I kept delaying belief in myself. How about this? The moment it finally clicked for me, there was a point when I realized something uncomfortable. I was shutting myself down more than anyone else ever had. Not because people didn't believe in me, not because opportunities weren't available, but because I was afraid of messing it up, being judged, looking inexperienced, or failing publicly. And here's the truth, none of that makes you weak, but allowing fear to make your decisions will quietly keep your life small. Saying yes doesn't mean going all in, and this part matters. Saying yes to yourself doesn't mean quitting your job tomorrow, making a big announcement, having everything figured out, or suddenly being fearless. That's not real life. For me, it started with small yeses. Yes, I'll speak up even if my voice shakes. Yes, I'll try even if I'm not confident yet. Yes, I show up imperfectly. Yes, I stop waiting for permission. Small yeses create momentum. Momentum builds confidence. Confidence builds belief, never the other way around. This was the biggest shift I had to make. The change that altered everything for me was simple but powerful. I stopped asking, am I ready? And started asking, am I willing to learn? Readiness is a moving target. Learning is always accessible. Once I gave myself permission to be a beginner, to make mistakes and adjust along the way, the pressure eased. And that's when progress finally began. So let me ask you directly for a moment. If you've been telling yourself, I can do that, that's not for me, I'm not that kind of person, I just messed it up, ask yourself this, is this actually true or is it simply familiar? Because many of the beliefs we hold about ourselves aren't facts. There are habits, and habits can be changed. You don't need confidence, you need permission. Here's something I wish I had learned sooner. Confidence isn't required to begin, permission is. Permission to try to learn, to fail, to adjust, and to grow in public. Once I stopped waiting to feel confident and started moving anyway, confidence followed on its own. Everything I'm sharing with you right now comes from moments when I doubted myself, hesitated, and nearly stayed stuck. So if you're listening and thinking, this sounds like me, that's a good thing. It means you're paying attention because the people who grew aren't the ones who never doubted themselves. They're the ones who kept moving despite the doubt instead of letting it run the show. In the next topic, we'll talk about how to stop tearing yourself down with your own words and how to replace that inner no with something that actually supports you. Stay with me, my friends. Alright, my friends, let's keep this practical because one of the biggest reasons people say no to themselves is the way they talk to themselves. Pay attention to the quiet ways to talk yourself down. Most self doubt isn't loud or dramatic. It shows up quietly, sounding like, I'm probably not good at that. I always mess things up. I'm just not that kind of person. Who do I think I am? The problem is, when you repeat those thoughts long enough, they start feeling like options and start feeling like facts. But they aren't facts, they're habits. How about this? You never speak to someone you care about that way. Think about it for a moment. If someone you love said, I don't think I could do this, you wouldn't reply with, yeah, you're right, you'll probably fail. You say things like, you'll figure it out, you've handled harder things, just take it one step at a time. So here's the real question. Why do you give yourself less patience than you give everyone else? Let's be honest. You don't need positive talk. You need truthful talk. This isn't about hyping yourself or pretending everything is fine. It's about changing the language you use. Swap, I can do this, for I don't know how yet. Swap, I always fail, for I'm still learning. Swap, I'm not built for this, for I'm allowing to grow into this. The small shifts carry more impact than you realize. Here's one simple practice you can use today. When you catch yourself saying, I can't, pause and ask, what's one small thing I can do right now? Not the full plan, not the perfect version, just one step. Because progress doesn't come from being certain everything will work out. It comes from showing up anyway. Now let's bring it home. Here's the truth. You hear your own voice more than anyone else. So make sure it isn't the one holding you back. You don't need to hype yourself up. You just need to stop tearing yourself down. In the final part, I'll leave you with a simple challenge you can actually use this week. Something small, practical, and real. Let's close this out strong. All right, my friends, before we wrap this up, I want to slow things down for a moment. If this episode felt personal, that's because it is. A lot of us aren't being held back by lack of talent, lack of opportunity, lack of ability. We're being held back by the quiet ways we talk ourselves out of things. The times we say, I wait until I'm ready, I'm probably not good enough. That's not for people like me. I'll try later. And what I hope you take away today is this. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need confidence first. You don't need permission. You just need to stop saying no to yourself before life even gets a chance to respond. Because most growth doesn't happen after you feel ready. It happens because you decide to try it anyway. A simple takeaway you can put into practice. This week, notice one moment where you normally talk yourself out of something. Whether it's speaking up, trying something new, asking a question, setting a boundary, or taking a small risk. Instead of saying, I can't, try saying, let me see what happens. That's it. No pressure, no perfection, just curiosity. Now let me share this on a personal level. I'm still learning all of this too. I've doubted myself, talked myself out of opportunities, waited longer than I needed to, and made mistakes along the way. I'm still figuring things out as I go. This podcast is part of that journey for me. It's a space where I can think out loud, be honest, and grow in real time. So if you're listening and thinking, yeah, I'm working on this too, you're exactly where you meant to be. And I want to open this up to you directly. If you got something on your mind, if you're working through something, if you want to share a story, or if you just want to have a real conversation, I love to have listeners come on this show and talk about anything that matters to them. You can reach me by sending me a DM on Instagram or TikTok at The Influence Exchange, or use the fan mail links in the episode description. With no pressure, no perfect story needed, just real people and real conversations. Thank you for pressing play. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere this podcast shows up. I don't take your time lightly. Subscribe, leave a review, and remember, your influence grows every time you choose courage over comfort. I'm JV. Stay curious, stay consistent, and keep influencing others. Thank you.